Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Corporate Services Committee. It being 12 p.m., I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I will begin by acknowledging that the City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenni, Pequot, and Attawandaron peoples. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today. And as representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. I would also like to share that the City of London is committed to making every opportunity to provide alternate formats and communication supports for meetings upon request. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca or phone 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I'll begin the meeting by looking for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I see none. So we'll move on to the consent agenda. I've not been made aware of anything that colleagues wish to have pulled. Of course, we can ask lots of questions and comments for that, for anything on the consent agenda, but does anyone wish anything pulled to be dealt with separately? Councillor Trossow.
I have I have a number of questions about 2.8, so it might warrant pulling it.
Okay, we can deal with 2.8 separately. Anything else? Seeing none, then I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the balance of the consent agenda. That's 2.1 through 2.7 and 2.9. Moved by Councillor Stevenson, seconded by Councillor Ferreira. So that is on the floor. We'll look for any speakers to that. Councillor Trossow.
I just wanted to acknowledge that I had some questions about consent item 2.2, and Mr. Schultheis answered those as well as I think can be done at this point. One of the things I did request, not an emergency, but a list of, if at some point we could get a list of everybody who is currently in that pool working for us. What is it, like a dozen people?
And just through the chair, and I will share that a list was circulated by email this morning for the current appointees. We'll see if the clerk has anything to add to that.
Thank you. Through the chair, yeah, that's correct. I did circulate a list this morning. Currently, we have 5 members. 1 member has indicated that he cannot continue. So there's currently 5 appointees.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item?
My further question, and I'm not going to raise it as pulling this today, but at some point in the future, I'm wondering if this could be referred to governance for us to look at the overall relationship between these appointments and other appointments we make, particularly as an equity lens might be coming out of the governance committee for our appointments in general. And again, I'm not going to put this on the floor now, but I'm just through the chair indicating that that's something I'd like to discuss in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. I will just share that committees can always refer some direction to the governance working group. I think that we can also perhaps get a comment from the clerk in terms of, because I just believe, and I want to be clear on this so that it's there for the public as well, that city staff are already applying our equity, our anti-oppression and anti-racism lens when they go through the recruitment process for any vacancies. But I will go to Mr. Schultheis to give us some clarity on that.
Thank you. And through the chair, one thing that I should note that was not included in the cover report is that pursuant to the hearings officer bylaw, the hearings officer shall be appointed by council on the recommendation of the city clerk. Just in response to the equity and inclusion lens, it was a very significant aspect of the targeted recruitment that the individuals have both a record of community service and a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. So hopefully, Councillor, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, one more question through the chair. How do we let the public know that we're doing this recruitment, or that you're doing this recruitment?
And we'll go to the city clerk.
Thank you. And through the chair, as I indicated, it's a targeted recruitment. So we're using existing networks. We're reaching out to specialized parts of the London community that may possess those types of skills.
Thank you. Looking for any further question or comment? Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, and through the chair, I was just curious why this process looks different from all of our other committees and boards. It just feels a little different. You did indicate it's a targeted, and still curious why there isn't like a pool that we vote on or that it looks similar to the others.
And
we'll go through to the city clerk for that.
Thank you. And through the chair, hearings officers occupy a particular role where they need to be neutral. They're applying administrative law principles. They're applying a number of principles to make decisions in a third-party arm's length relationship with the city. They are not employees of the city. They are hearing these hearings and they're adjudicating. So they're a quasi-judicial function. So they are slightly different from, say, an advisory committee where that's more of a community engagement aspect and they're advising council directly. Here there is no relationship between the hearings officers and council.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. And I was thinking more of the Committee of Adjustments, like comparing it to the Committee of Adjustments. And then I just wanted to confirm there is no remuneration. This is a voluntary thing.
To the clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair. I'll speak to the remuneration. Currently, it's $100. That is out of alignment with a lot of other municipalities. That's $100 per day. That is out of alignment with other municipalities, and that is currently under review. I can't speak to the Committee of Adjustment. That falls under a different set of legislation, so I can't speak to that. And that's not something that the clerk's office oversees.
Thank you. Looking for any other questions or comments on the balance of the consent agenda? Seeing none, then we'll get the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion passed 4-0.
All right, moving on. The only thing left from the consent agenda is 2.8, the 2023 tax policy expectations. Councillor Trussow, you did ask for this to be pulled to be dealt with separately. First, I'm going to just look for a mover and a seconder to get the motion on the floor, and then we can frame our discussion around receiving this report. Moved by Councillor Stevenson. And I will second that. And now we will open the floor for questions and comments. Councillor Trussow?
Yes, through the chair, I'd like to just request that since this is our first time through this process, you could give us a little bit of an overview in terms of what the parameters are of our decision and how far can we get into using different categories, and if we make a decision in one direction, how does that play out in the other direction? Just an overview.
Thank you, Councillor Trussow. That actually is a good suggestion, and we'll go to Ms. Barbone to give us an overview on this.
Thank you, through the chair. So today's tax policy expectations report is not one that we typically do. It is one that we do because it is a new council to give a great deal of education, information, and kind of one-stop shopping related to tax policy. So we've included the presentation that gives a bit of an overview of the entire process and how the assessment works and how then that is taken and translated through the budget into tax policy. So today's not necessarily any decision that is actually required, although if there is a specific direction that the committee and council would like us to go through, some direction would certainly be helpful. So really what this is setting the stage is ultimately, now that the budget has been set, the amount of revenue from taxation has been determined through the budget process. So the tax policy is how those, that total amount of revenue is going to be essentially how that pie is split up and divvied between the various classes. So that's what ultimately the tax policy decision is that you will make in April. So in April, once we've received, typically it should be the first meeting in April, provided we have all the regulations received from the province, which we anticipate will happen this year at this point. And that with that information, we take the education rates, we take the tax revenue, and we determine how, based on the assessment, those tax ratios are put forward. And the actual tax ratios are approved at that April meeting. So really today, what we're trying to do is to provide an overview of how the policy shifts. So ultimately, the guiding principle with respect to taxation is that depending, the pie will always be the amount determined by the budget. The ratios will divvy up how big a particular class will pay for the share of that revenue. So all things being equal, because there is no reassessment this year, if the tax ratios are not changed, the taxation rates will be the same, the level of increase will be the same across all of the classes from a percentage perspective. So at this point, given that there is no reassessment and that we are looking to equalize and maintain some of that equalization between particularly residential and multi-residential, we're not recommending that there has to be a particular change in the strategy made. Although if there was a particular objective that council wished to meet, such as to start to reduce some of the commercial and industrial ratios, that could be something that could be entertained if they wanted to rejig how that pie is sliced. So from a decision perspective, today really is about trying to ask questions if there's anything within the report that you'd like to understand. But if there is a particular direction, we'd be happy to ensure that when we bring forward the report in April, that we bring that forward with the expectation. Notwithstanding that, the way we've done it the last couple of years is to show various alternatives and what the ultimate changes would be in the tax rates when we bring forward that April report. So that even if you were to give a direction now, that will not preclude council or the committee taking a different direction in April once you see what the actual tax rate increases would be from making any changes at that time. So we would do a table where we would say, you know, if you change the residential, if you change the multi-residential or the, you know, commercial or industrial rates, what the impact of that would be so that council can make a very informed decision. And we do that also after the inclusion of the education taxes, because with some of the changes in, because the reassessment hasn't happened, London has typically had a lower, we've been able to take advantage of some of the changes that have occurred with the small business tax, education tax being taken off, which has actually been very, very helpful in terms of mitigating some of those tax rate increases that we've seen. So that's been a very positive change over the last number of years. So that hopefully this will set the stage, but certainly no decision is required. And if there's something or a particular scenario you'd like us to bring forward, we'd be happy to make sure that we include that in the April report. So hopefully that gives you a brief overview of what it is we're trying to achieve today, and happy to answer any specific questions further to that.
Yes, through the chair, I do have a few more. So the last sentence in the conclusion just confused me a little bit, because it looked like you were asking for a specific motion there. So should council agree with the suggested approach, a motion to support this would be appropriate. We don't have to make that motion today. Is that correct?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So no, you do not have to make that in motion. If there was a particular area that committee really wanted us to ensure that we were starting to move in that direction, a motion would be in order. But if the committee would prefer to see what the changes would be with different tax ratios when we bring the report forward, that motion would not be necessary. Really, what we want to make sure is that if there was a direction that committee or council wanted us to go, that we would ensure that that was there, and a motion would be in favor to make sure we bring that forward. But if there isn't a compelling area you want us to go, then a motion would not be required.
Thank you, that's helpful. So my next question focuses on residential properties. To what degree, and I'll ask this to the chair, to what degree does council have any discretion to create subclasses within residential property? For example, owner-occupied versus non-owner occupied.
Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, residential class, there are not subclasses available, regardless of the ownership type. So if that's what I believe that's the question that you're looking at.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trussow?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm trying to, I'm just trying to understand if there's any possible way we could provide some further targeted relief to homeowners who are living in their house as a principal place of residence. And I took that as a no.
That's correct. The answer to that is no, there's no subclasses available.
The next question I want to raise deals with in multi-residential properties. If there's a large increase, and if it's over a certain amount, the owners would, based on the provincial rules of getting an above guideline increase, be able to apply to the board for an increase. However, in the other direction, is there an obligation for landlords to, this is something outside of the city's power, but if it's lower, does it work in the other direction? Do tenants get any of that relief?
Well, I am going to see which of Ms. Barbone's team wants to take that one.
Through the chair, yes, there is a process each fall where we look at, there's a threshold currently at 2.49%. So if the assessment has been reduced by that threshold or more, then we send first a letter to the landlords identifying the percentage of decrease that is required for their tenants, and then field questions from the landlord. Once that timeline is passed, then we send notification to the tenants that they can expect a reduction based on that calculation.
Thank you for that.
One final, more precise question. I understand that in many situations, residential buildings that are going to be tenant occupied are marketed and sold in a condominium format. I've seen a number of these in my area, and I'm familiar with the fact that it's a financial product that the real estate industry likes to sell to investors in terms of owning the condominium, but not living there. Is there any disadvantage to the city in terms of the taxes that we bring in from that property when this format is used, as opposed to it being characterized as what it really is, a multi-residential property?
Who wants to handle
Through the
this?
chair, we did see a fair number of conversions from multi-residential to condo when prior to the implementation of the new residential class, which was brought in 2017. The new residential are considered new for 35 years, and they are taxed at the residential rate. So with that implementation, there's no benefit to them converting, not as much of a tax benefit at least, to convert to condo. So we're seeing more increase in the new residential class. It's not specifically a condo class because they would be termed residential once they go to that, but we also keep track of the condos in terms of the the rent reduction required each fall.
Thank you for that.
I guess I'm asking through the chair is there a difference in the aggregate tax roll in a particular building from situation A, it's owned in condo form and there are 30 different owners, or situation B, where it's owned by the landlord as one owner? Is there a difference in the aggregate tax roll?
Okay, so Councillor Trussow, I'm going to have staff answer that question, and then I'm going to go to other members of the committee because I have a full speakers list. If you have other questions, we'll come back to you. So can we get an answer from staff on the aggregate tax roll question?
Thank you, through the chair. I'll start and Mr. McMillan can add to it. So trying to think how many years ago, we were starting to see a number of older buildings that were starting to convert. And the primary change when you see some of that happen is there's a valuation difference between how MPAC assesses those type of versus a residential versus a multi-residential property. So the challenge is, from our perspective, is we don't know what the difference would be because the valuation would be valued under a different methodology to be able to compare, and that's not something that MPAC would do for us. So it's really hard from our perspective based on we get the valuation from MPAC, it's determined by them, and we know what the tax revenue will be from that. But alternatively, when it is changed and goes to a different route, that valuation will be different because it's not valued in the same manner. So from our perspective, we don't know what that other valuation would be to be able to assess whether the difference in revenue would be there. The owners are essentially doing that analysis before they build as to whether approach they might feel is different and whether they want to potentially change the valuation by converting it to, say, a condo. Now, given the new class, this would be prior to the class, because now with the new residential, with the new multi-residential buildings class, that is now, they're all valued consistently in the same manner and taxed as a residential property. So there's a bit of an inequity in the system that was created when that new class of property assessment was created, because they're not all valued the same way. But that's ultimately where we used to see many would take the gamble to try to convert them to condos. We have seen that slow down quite considerably since that time. So there has clearly been some impact with the new multi-residential valuation class through its creation to try to mitigate some of that inequity.
And did Mr. McMillan want to add anything, or did that cover everything?
Yeah, that covers the valuation difference. The main difference in revenue would be between the multi-residential rate and the residential rate. And that would be, even if at the same value, the revenue would be lower from those buildings and then shifted to other classes.
Thank you for that. I have Mayor Morgan on the list, and then I have Councillor Ferreira. I also have Councillor Pribble as a visiting councillor. So Mayor Morgan, you are up next.
So thank you, colleagues, and I came today because I couldn't possibly miss a discussion on tax policy. Having sat on corporate services for my entire term on council, I would say this is probably one of the most important but also most complicated matters that we deal with, and I think you catch that from the Q&A. What I wanted to articulate is a concern that I have, not with the report before us, but with the general situation that we're in across the province relating from the MPAC valuation freeze. As you know, the valuations of the different tax classes have been frozen for a period of time. And so as time progresses, obviously the market valuations have changed, but the MPAC valuations have not. As the treasurer and deputy city manager mentioned, we control the budget pie. Who pays for that is a function of our tax ratios, as well as the changes in relative valuation across the different tax ratios, both for the pie slices themselves and even within the pie across individual properties within the same tax class. So here is what we don't know. We do not know how valuations have changed. We can speculate, we can say we think we know, but we don't know how valuations have changed in appreciation over time, over the period of this freeze. When I met with the finance minister at our AMO delegations last fall, I raised this concern and I said, what I would like to see is MPAC run the valuations across the system, share that with municipal partners so that we can see where the potential shifts of taxation would occur across the classes before there is a move to unfreeze the valuations, so that we could provide some suggestions to the province on mitigating any dramatic shifts between who would pay for the tax classes. It could be putting, you know, a heavy burden on residential payers. It could be putting in it could be putting on multi-residential. It could be a benefit to the commercial. We don't know, because we don't know how the relative values have appreciated over time. Why that would be important is because, you know, we may think that a 3 point whatever tax increase is reasonable, but when you layer in the changes in valuations, some people may be facing a 10% increase, and some people may be facing a minus 2% increase, because we have no control over that. We could mitigate the shifts in valuation through the adjustment of our tax ratios if we knew how the properties had appreciated. The challenge we have with that is we may need some provincial flexibility, because some of the classes have restrictions on the directionality that we can move the ratios, including the commercial class. So we have to move the commercial class within a certain corridor, and I think almost every municipality, if I'm wrong, is above the current allowable corridor. So there's really only a reduction that you could make. So our ability to smooth the budgetary the costs of the budget across the different tax classes is limited until we know what the valuation changes look like, and then we engage with the province on any sort of strategy that they would have to mitigate those over time if they were dramatic in some way. So all this to say, there's two reasons why I came here. One is, I think we should be very cautious about changing our tax policy in the absence of knowing where everything has changed over a period of time. And two, I think it would be helpful to have the support of the committee, verbally or otherwise, to continue the advocacy that I would like to make in engaging with the province to say, you need to have a very thoughtful and thorough discussion with municipal partners on how valuations have changed before you unfreeze the valuations, so that we can provide feedback and suggestions to you on strategies to smooth that tax rate increase if it's dramatic across different tax classes. A concerning piece that I heard was AMO has carved out a potential new advocacy position to say, it's been a long time, let's unfreeze the valuations. And in my early discussions with them, I don't think they're thinking about that kind of first step in the process, and that's, let's have MPAC run the valuations, share them, get some policy feedback from municipalities, and then move to unfreeze them with a plan, if necessary, if valuations have dramatically appreciated at dramatically different rates. So that's what I came here to say, and share with colleagues a concern that I have. So one, the caution of making any dramatic changes before we know that, and two, getting your support for that continued advocacy position that I've been making on engaging with the province in the way that I've described. Get us the data, let us provide feedback before you make any dramatic changes to the valuation freeze. I don't know if our staff need to comment on that, or colleagues have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer, but I think that this is an important point in time for us to understand tax policy and also understand what the valuation freeze has potentially done to the future shifts in who pays the taxes in the city.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, you did open the door, so I will go to Ms. Barbone and see if she has anything to add to the comments she just provided.
Thank you, through the chair. So His Worship is correct. We do not know what those impacts are going to be. And certainly, if that is something that they would be willing to share, we would be happy to provide comments as to what those impacts could be and potential options that the municipalities could consider for whether it's phase-in, et cetera. The province has typically always provided us with tools for flexibility through reassessments in the past. So we hope that that will continue in the future. Certainly with our recommended approach, we've suggested that, to keep everything equal and not significantly alter them now is what our recommendation was, for the very reason that His Worship had mentioned, was to provide as much flexibility to the council down the road, not knowing what that valuation change would be. So we would absolutely support that position of trying to receive that information and hopefully inform them as to what those potential options are and ways that we might mitigate them, and that they might be able to roll out across the province.
Thank you for that. So before I go to our next speaker on the list, hearing the mayor's wrap up unless there are any members of the committee that are objecting to it, and I don't think we need a specific direction on this, I think that the committee is generally, would share a consensus that you should continue that advocacy work, Your Worship, and that you should, of course, get information from staff that you can share with our provincial counterparts as you go along and do that work through AMO and through the Big City Mayor's Caucus. So do we have general consensus from committee that we can proceed that way? Councillor Trussow?
Yes, I'm wondering if it might not be, I'm wondering if maybe we should try to draft a more precise, it being noted and it further being noted, so it's on the record. I think there's a general agreement, and we appreciate you. I appreciate you coming here and saying that. But I believe that the city is being. I believe that municipalities in general are being put at a disadvantage in that we're not capturing the full value of the amazing run-up in property values, and I think that that's a lost increment, and I'd like to start recapturing that as soon as possible. So I'm just wondering if maybe you have a better sense of this, but is there some language that we could offer as an amendment?
So the clerk has been working quickly to draft something up for us, Councillor. And certainly as the seconder, I would see this as something we can just add in, that the mayor be directed to continue advocacy to the province on behalf of the City of London with respect to MPAC and the freezing, unfreezing of tax class valuations. And I see Councillor Stevenson nodding and indicating that she'll support that as an addition to the motion that's on the floor too. So we'll include that as some specific direction. And Your Worship?
And just so I'm clear, the way that I'm interpreting that is the advocacy will be to the province, share data with us on how property appreciations have changed so that we can provide feedback before the province makes any significant change in direction. So that would be the position that I would be going to advocate for.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Ferreira.
And thank you, and through you. The mayor actually answered a lot of my questions. I had two questions, and the first one was really the inherent risk associated with kind of adjusting the tax ratios and not having the impact assessment come through yet. So I saw that you did speak about the fact that we're kind of at the limit, almost at the limit of the industrial and commercial tax ratios already, and I did see that the report spoke a lot about flexibility, and I thought it was pretty clear, if we max that out, our flexibility is really down from that point. So I do see that. So I do like seeing, just to see what the impact assessment does come up. And I do like the motion or how it's been amended so far with the advocacy, just to see what the assessment will look like and just to see how much property tax valuations or the valuations of everything would kind of change. So I guess I would kind of just reform my first question a little bit and ask, is there any way that we could kind of put like some type of number or a mark or a threshold if we were to have some type of property kind of significantly increase in their property valuation as per MPAC? Is there any way we can, with the phase-in process for the property tax or anything like that to kind of mitigate the original impact that would have if it were to be significantly kind of off the charts? Is there anything like that? That would be my first question. Then I have one after. So I just want to know if staff could just maybe point on to that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. McMillan, did you want that one?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, one of the announcements made by the province for 2023 is that the tax ratio flexibility will be permanent, and that wasn't clear prior to this announcement. And what that means is, since we are below the threshold of 1.95, I believe, or 1.98, which is the provincial threshold for commercial and industrial, we are at 1.91 currently, so we could adjust our ratios upward in the case of seeking revenue neutrality, which is avoiding those tax shifts that may occur. So we have quite a bit of room there compared to some other municipalities. However, if there's a significant spike that revenue neutrality won't be able to mitigate, then we may need to seek some, because of this long-term freeze, seek some powers from the province to do a one-time exception to that threshold.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ferreira?
And thank you, and through you. Okay, that's, I like that answer. I was just kind of wondering about that because I feel like because we have had such a freeze for such a long time, I wouldn't be surprised if we had something significant, probably in multiple properties come up. So just planning ahead. And my second question, not necessarily for what we're speaking to now, but when I first saw that we were kind of talking about this, I was like, oh, that's good, because I would like to, I hear a lot of people speaking about the multi-residential property tax and how it's higher than residential and it's not necessarily fair to tenants specifically or any type of occupants in multi-res buildings. Looking at the chart here, it does look like London is around the average, but my question would be, like if we were to reduce, let's say we come to the decision that we do reduce the tax ratio for the multi-residential property tax, is there any way that we can ensure that the tenants will actually see this impact on their rent or anything like that? Is there any ways that we could actually ensure that any type of reduction in the property tax for a multi-res building would actually be seen by the tenants themselves? Thanks.
And I think we'll go back to Mr. McMillan. I think you answered that in part at least earlier, so
Well,
perhaps
for
just expand.
existing tenants year over year, sorry, through the chair, then we could ensure that anything over the 2.49% threshold would result in a mandatory reduction. However, for any new tenants, there's no guarantee that that reduction will be passed on to them.
Councillor Ferreira?
Okay, I don't have a response right now. Let me think about that, but thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor Stevenson from the committee on the list next, and then Councillor Pribble. Councillor Stevenson?
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, I just wanted to say thank you for giving us this information ahead of April. And I also, in response to what the mayor said, is it possible to share that advocacy public so that groups like community associations, business associations, that kind of thing can also support that advocacy? Because I think it's good to let the people know that we are doing that work and how they can support. And my question to staff is, and you don't need to answer, but I'm just wondering, best guess, what are our concerns that, what class, say residential, we're worried that that one might take the brunt of the tax increase and commercial might be the one that, when the mayor said 10% minus 2%, do we have a best guess as to who would get the hit and who would get the benefit?
So I think what we're going to do first is, I know it might be slightly unusual, but in terms of the public piece of the advocacy question, I'm going to go to Mayor Morgan to perhaps elaborate on what parts of advocacy are more in-camera items and what parts are more public.
Yes, so an advocacy approach that we would traditionally take is we have a support from our GR folks. We have external organizations that we liaise with, whether it's AMO or Ontario Big City Mayors, FCM on federal issues. So we would bring those positions to those organizations and try to craft out basically a larger coalition or a larger position. I've already raised this initially at Ontario Big City Mayors with a lot of nods on the screen when I expressed the concerns that we have. As for sharing it out with the public to gain support, I don't see any harm in sharing the advocacy position on tax ratios, except for the fact that it's probably very boring and complicated for many. But what I could do is endeavor to, as we craft out those positions to share with our partners, is share that information with members of council, and they could share it with the relevant community organizations who they think might have the interest in being involved in something like this. At the end of the day, to the question that I know the chair will go to answer, I'm not sure staff is going to be able to give a coherent answer to that, which is exactly why I think we need the data on how things have shifted. You could guess that the residential class is appreciated quite well and the commercial class is not, and that there would be a shift between those two. But there's also valuation differences in the way that MPAC values those different classes, and even the way that they value different multi-residential under the new class and the old class. So there's, you know, really it's the MPAC data that really drives the answer to your question. Everything else might be a little bit of speculation, given the length of time that it's been frozen, which I think is back to 2016 is the current date that it's frozen to. So.
Thank you for that, Your Worship. And I was going to go to staff to answer the second part of that question. I think you may have answered most of it for them already, but I will go to Ms. Parbone to see if she has any additional comment in terms of what her crystal ball might be predicting, because I will be very clear with all members. We're asking staff to speculate here, and that's very tough for them to do.
Thank you through the chair. So I will not speculate because I really we do not know. But what will be critically important in trying to estimate what class might have an increase is what the date of the valuation will be, because that has not been decided yet. So it was supposed to be 2020, but we do not have any confirmation of what the date of valuation will be. So depending on the date of valuation, the values could swing quite dramatically between 2016 and what that time is. And from year to year, there could be a dramatic swing as well. So it really, I think that's why looking at that information would really help us to understand what swings could be anticipated, because they may not be what we might be expecting, but depending on the date, they may substantially change that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Barbone. Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you. And like I said, this really has been helpful. I thought of this when we were doing the budget, what the impact of this was going to be, because we have a video out for the public to see, assuring them that the market rate increases or the property valuations don't affect their property taxes, and yet there is this piece that does. And I think although tax policy is not very exciting, the thought of 10% or minus 2% is very engaging for people, because there are some that are struggling with 3.1. And I think it will be good to be proactive with people, that it's not necessarily 3.1 equally across the board, and that we may or may not have impact in exactly how that is divvied up. And I think being proactive in that is going to help.
Thank you, Councillor. And I didn't hear a specific question in there, just more commentary, so.
Yes, just comment, and yes, please, as a councillor anyway, requesting that information that I can share it out.
Absolutely. We've got Councillor Pribble next on the list. Councillor, thanks for visiting our committee again.
My pleasure, as always. Through the chair to the staff, just one quick procedural question. When the council is presented in April with the various scenarios, is the assumption that that night will be voting on it and decision made, or there will be some time to think about and discuss, or that night will be the decision made? Thank you.
Well, Councillor, just to be clear, it'll come back to this committee first and then to council, but we'll go through to Ms. Barbone to provide an outline on that.
Thank you through the chair. So certainly if we are able to bring it earlier rather than later, then perhaps there would be time. But the general expectation is, based on the timing, that particularly with respect to the council meetings, there isn't opportunity to have multiple meetings to decide what that is. So our standard process would be, we would bring forward our report to the April Corporate Services Committee. And because there's only one council meeting, we do need to have it approved before the end of April, such that we can have enough time to get the tax bills out and to meet our fiduciary duties as part of the Municipal Act to allow enough timing for those receipts. So the expectation is that, of course, there's a week time between almost not quite a week when it's released on the Wednesday for councillors if there are questions in advance of the Corporate Services Committee, and then it would go to that following council. So we did put in a special CSC meeting just in case, where we've had some issues in the past where the province did not provide us the information we needed until the very last minute, so that we couldn't actually meet the committee deadline. So we did put a special meeting in. So if there is a requirement that council couldn't make a decision or the committee wanted to see it again before it went to council, we do have a special CSC meeting that has been slotted in just before the final council meeting in April that could be utilized if council wasn't able to make a decision, or the committee wasn't able to make a decision because it is within the same council committee cycle.
Perfect, thank you. And if there's a chance to receive it earlier or for you to complete it and present to us, that would be greatly appreciated and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trussow.
One last question. Should London decide to move forward with the vacant unit property tax, which, subject to certain conditions, we would have the ability to do under provincial law with the ministerial approval, that would be something separate and apart from this whole discussion, and it would not figure into any of these calculations? It would be, yeah, that's my question.
Ms. Barbone.
Yes, thank you through the chair. The councillor is correct. That would be separate and apart from any tax policy decision. That tax, the way the vacant residential tax works is it is levied on top of the current taxes that are owed, and it's a surcharge on top should that be implemented.
Thank you for that. All right, I have no one, oh, Councillor Ferreira. Sorry, I got to remember to look both ways.
No worries. You're looking over, everyone's over there, so. All right, and thanks to you. I have actually one more question, or two more questions, actually. Just, I wanted to know, like, if we did decide to maybe move some of the tax rates, would there be unintended, like right now, before the impact assessment, is there a possibility of having an unintended consequence of impact assessing after our moves? Is it like, could we trigger something like that if we were to adjust the tax ratios now?
Ms. Barbone.
So through the chair, so if we were to adjust the tax ratios, you would know the impact now, but the only risk with that of a potential unintended consequence would be that it may limit your flexibility to change the tax ratios, say next year if the reassessment were to go through. So maintaining them now, as Mr. McMillan had mentioned earlier, we have a great deal of flexibility. If they were to change slightly, it may impact your flexibility, but we would not know that until the reassessment was completed to know for sure.
Councillor Ferreira.
No, that answers my question, and I'll stop it there. Thanks.
Okay. I have no one else on the speakers list, so we'll get the clerk to open the vote on this.
Closing the vote, and the motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Moving on, we have nothing on item 3 for scheduled items. On item 4, we have 3 items for direction. 2 were added. All 3 are proclamation applications. I will just share with committee that I have checked to make sure that each of the 3 has a London connection, so I don't feel that any need to be pulled if we wished to deal with all of these together, or we can deal with them all on separate votes. So I'll look for some direction from committee on how you'd like to proceed. Councillor Stevenson.
I'll put a motion forward for all 3.
Okay, so we're going to move all 3 together, seconded by Councillor Ferreira. Any comments or questions on these? Seeing none, then we'll get the clerk to open the vote. And bear with us for just a moment while she bundles those 3 together. And the vote should now be open on your screens.
Closing the vote, and the motion passes 5-0.
You colleagues, moving on, we have nothing on item 5, deferred matters and additional business, but we do have one confidential item under section 6, and this is in regard to property acquisition. So we're going to look for a motion to move in camera. Moved by Councillor Trussow and seconded by Councillor Stevenson, and we'll get that vote open.
Closing the vote, motion passes 5-0.
All right, colleagues, give us just a moment to secure the chambers and shuffle the Zoom chairs, and we will proceed with item 6.1. All right, welcome back to the public session for Corporate Services Committee. I am going to call on Councillor Trussow as Vice Chair to report out on our in-camera session.
Yes, I'd like to report that the committee considered item 6.1 pertaining to a land acquisition matter for proposed or pending acquisition of land by the municipality. And I can report that progress was made on this matter.
Thank you for that, Councillor. And that concludes our agenda items, colleagues. So all that is left is looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Stevenson, seconded by Councillor Ferreira, and we can do this by hand. All those in favor?
And that motion passes.
Thank you, colleagues. We stand adjourned. And for those who haven't had enough committee work today, Planning and Environment Committee starts at 4 p.m.